The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
And hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show. I'm your host, Charles Christian, and Janie will be joining me shortly for another of our weekly forays into the world of ghosts, geek, magic, folklore, urban myths, and witchcraft. And I think we've got a bit of pretty much all of that in the show to come. So, let's get on with it. Time for some news in brief now, and it's a true bumper bundle, like they used to say on two-way family favourites on the radio in the 1950s. Yeah, I'm that old. The first is a report of an auction going on at Sotheby's in New York, and the auction is called Sculptural Fantasy, the important American art collection of Stephen and Petra Levin. And these are all kinds of bits of Midwestern materials, drug shop Indians, signposts, toys, the like, from the late 19th century through to the early 20th century. And this particularly attracted my eye. It's described as a very rare carved and polychrome painted decorated wood sculpture of an exorcism scene, Midwestern, circa 1910, depicting a group of people surrounding a child in a bed with a demon. And it's just like it says. There's a couple of preacher man guys all in black, a frightened wife with her hair in a bun, a child hiding under the bedclothes in sort of a cute way, and this little monster demon sitting on top of the child. The bidding has closed, but they haven't announced the winner yet. It's mainly an online auction, I think, but it's an estimate of between 40 and 60,000 US dollars. And looking at some of the bids that have been declared already, a lot of them are selling for far more than the estimates. Right, another story. It's witchcraft. And this is from the Star newspaper and online site in Kenya. The headline is, "She's not my wife, she's a witch," says lawyer. And basically the story is a lawyer claims that his wife, who is a judge, and therefore presumably another lawyer, is slowly administering toxic and poisonous substances in his meals and drinks, trying to kill him slowly without suspicion. Whereas the wife says it's all because her husband acted unlawfully by entering into a sale agreement to sell land without involving her or her family. So it's lawyer Edwin Wawire. Wawire. And he has disowned a magistrate who claims to be his wife. That is Diana Wikunza Milmu. And he accuses her of being deeply entrenched in cultism, witchcraft, black magic, and Satanism. Sounds like the type of women we like to meet. She also says the magistrate, this is Diana Milimu, entertained old men who performed rituals on her while she was naked. We'll tiptoe over that bit. The lawyer Edwin Wawire, goes on to say, "I deny ever being married to the applicant," that's Diana Milmu, "as she was a jaywalker and certified gold digger who happened to use her charms to bait me." Meanwhile, Milmu has started legal proceedings to halt the sale of a half-acre developed plot on the outskirts of a town. She says it's matrimonial property they acquired together as husband and wife through equal contributions. She says she's legally married to Waywire and that they also have a daughter. And she says they jointly developed the land and the lawyer even paid a dowry to her parents. And she's saying he's acting unlawfully by trying to sell it off without letting her know and without giving any balance. The lawyer goes on to say, this is Mr. Edwin Waywire. He says, I admit that at a certain part of 2012 I befriended the applicant, that's Diana, but our relationship was neither exclusive nor intended to be permanent. He says she was a second-year student at university and he helped her financially, like any other well-wisher. She voluntarily opted to move out of my property in 2015 when I confronted her about her habit of bringing back different men, and I've never seen her since. I came to learn that she had been slowly administering toxic and poisonous substances in my meals and drinks with a view to killing me without raising suspicion. And the case is next in court on November the 6th. He says that the dowry agreement that was mentioned earlier, he says it's a strange document to him since, although it bears his name, it does not have his signature. In the document, he's said to have given her parents 6 head of cattle and 50 Kenyan shillings in cash. And he goes on to say, after being employed by the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, she thought she had conquered the world and started treating me with contempt. He also denies ever having sired a child with her, and he dismisses the birth certificate as inadequate proof of paternity given the morals of the plaintiff, and says he never consented to having his name included on the document saying he was his father. So hopefully we'll learn a bit more about that one, but as is often the way with these stories, somehow they never get reported when they come back into news. And finally, we have a bit of news here sent to us by Greg Buffysis, who we interviewed a couple of shows ago. And he's pointed out a new geolocation system the University of Edinburgh has produced, and it is focusing on witchcraft and the persecution of witchcraft during Scotland's fairly grim history of witch hunting. It's an interactive map. You can find it at www.witches, that's witches.is.id.ac.uk/death. So www.witches.is.id.ac.uk/death. It runs from the 16th century to the 18th century and covers the period when 4,000 people in Scotland, most of them women, were tried for witchcraft, and possibly 2/3 of them were actually executed. There's a little article here by Fergus O'Sullivan explaining more about it in an online site called citylab.com. And he points out that although this was the period of witchcraft persecution in Europe, in Scotland, the number of people accused of being witches was between 4 and 5 times the European average. And this map, created by students at University of Edinburgh, provides data giving details of who the victims were, where they lived, were tried, and what was the outcome. And grim reading it is too. Look at the map and it's just a mass of dots. Edinburgh University's Julian Goodare, who was one of the researchers and compilers of the database, in his book The European Witch Hunt, says he sees parallels between the witch craze and modern anxieties. Nowadays, we have a wider range of cultural fears, such as fears of aliens, paedophiles, and terrorists. Some of these are encouraged by politicians or by commercial popular media. For example, the belief in abduction by aliens is the modern form of sleep disorder that shaped some accusations of witchcraft and witches' own confessions. The report also points out that the trials happened during the period of the Protestant Reformation, when spiritual and temporal power was changing, and the country's Witchcraft Act of 1563 kick-started, which is an unfortunate choice of words, kick-started the witch craze, just 3 years after Scotland officially adopted Protestantism. And indeed, King James VI, who later became King James I of Scotland, not only believed in witches, but also wrote a book on it called Demonology in 1597, his defence of witch hunting. He believes that on his wedding voyage back from Denmark, the Berwick witches, tried to sink his ship. Port goes on to say, ingrained cultural misogyny in Scotland. It was also a period of poor harvests, and generally when anything went wrong, people blamed them witches. Anyway, there you go. And if you want to be really grim about it, the method of execution tended to be burning at the stake, though they did usually strangle the women first before they burned them at the stake. So cheery stuff. Anyway, there's our news in brief. Exorcism in the Midwest, historical witchcraft in Scotland, and modern-day witchcraft in Kenya. Now, I recently got a copy of an old book now called The Haunted Pub Guide by Guy Leon Playfair. Was once well-known writer about the occult, parapsychologist. Probably his biggest claim to fame is that he was a consultant on the infamous BBC Ghostwatch, which aired on Halloween television in 1992. And we're talking about that in interview last week. Anyway, poor old guy, his reputation's toppled a bit in recent years. He came in for criticism for being less than vigorous in writing about Uri Geller. What do you think about Uri, Janie? Do you think he's the real McCoy and can bend it, or is he just a stage magician?
I'd probably go for the stage magician, but as you know, I'm a terribly cynical person, and not probably the best one to make a judgment.
Yep. And Mr. Playfair also came in for a bit of criticism over his handling of the Enfield poltergeist investigation in the 1970s, with various people suggesting that he didn't really spot that some elements were quite clearly children's pranks. Anyway, in his book on haunted pubs, there's some quite interesting background information where he talks about one of the founders of the Society for Psychical Research, and Frederick Myers, who states that a ghost is probably one of the most complex phenomena in nature. The point Myers wrote 130 years ago. He says, if a table moves when no one is touching it, then it is not obviously more likely to have been affected by my deceased grandfather than by myself. We cannot tell how I could move it, but we therefore cannot tell how he could have moved it either. Anyway, he has defined, as he calls them, apparitions, manifestations of ghosts. He defines them into 10 symptoms, 10 types of things that you will see that indicate there is something supernatural going on. The first one is the apparition, which we're all familiar with, the traditional concept of the ghost. Maybe just some kind of floating mist or blob, or otherwise it may well be a recognisable figure. And in his book on the haunted pubs, he reckons 43% of the hauntings follow that category. Then he's got footsteps.
Yes, footsteps. Apparently heard in about 21% of the cases surveyed, so quite common. They basically, obviously, are able to be misinterpreted of a normal sound, but many, many times, apparently, they've been realistic enough to lead to immediate searches, and they've been heard by all hours by a wide variety of witnesses, including quite a few policemen. And so this is kind of one of the most objective of the haunting systems, as it's a recognisable sound. In fact, just a little personal note here. Do you know, one of the most terrifying moments of my life was when I was in a house where I lived that I believed to be empty. Bear in mind, I do not spend my life listening out for ghosts. In fact, never think of them. And I heard footsteps.
Ooh.
And I was in the bathroom just washing my face. It wasn't like I was behind a shower curtain or anything. And I heard footsteps coming down from an attic area. Well, I just went into meltdown. And I turned my face to the wall and screamed with my hands over my eyes. It's just, you know, very useful.
It is,
Very,
yes.
very good. Yes, yes. It was, in fact, the person I shared the house with, who, unbeknownst to me, was in and had been up to the attic to check some things. Anyway, I'll just tell you that. It's just reminding me.
Yes.
I'm going to start off a load of nightmares now. Thanks very much. Anyway, yes, quite high up on the old
Yep.
apparitions.
And at number 3, we have psychokinesis. In other words, 17% of cases. This is basically the inexplicable movement of large objects and small ones. Things jumping off shelves, doors opening, doors closing, etc.
Yikes.
Yes.
I haven't heard. Have you heard anything along that sort of line at all? What comes to
things-
mind?
Things that sort of move.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
No personal experiences?
No personal
No.
experiences of that you can't just put
Me
down.
neither. Me neither. However, number 4 on the list is bedroom invaders.
Ooh.
Yeah. Now, this also reminds me of another personal incident, which I don't exactly feel I'm mentally scarred by it, but I do remember it. And bearing in mind, I don't remember that much from my very, very early childhood. I do remember waking up as a very small child in my cot, I think, and seeing a man come into the bedroom, lean round the door, and thinking, oh my, what on earth is that? Frightened, yes, so frightened I didn't make a noise. And obviously I worked it out in latter years. It was probably Dad, bless him, putting his head round the door to check I was okay. But I think his reflection was in a mirror behind him, you see. So it was very...
Yes.
And that was catching the light. So it was, yeah. But yes, it's a very complex symptom, apparently, and the most alarming.
Well, it would be.
Yeah. But it has been studied in depth by a professional research scientist. And Professor Hufford's book cannot be recommended too strongly. Also, an excellent summary of this is to be found in a recent work by Hilary Evans.
Right.
So any more info, there you go.
There you go. Okay, and then the next one are cold spots. And these are, I suppose, objective, because it's not like you're seeing a misty shape that some people say, "Oh, that's a monk or a skeleton." This is a cold area, and I suppose the intriguing question is whether it is actually of a supernatural nature or a purely natural nature, because I think we've all lived in houses in the past where there's been an area that's always damp and cold, that when you go past it, it's cool.
Yeah. We've got friends, don't know if you can remember them saying about in the pub that's not too far from here. And again, they're just ordinary folk, not inclined to strange ideas, but they definitely several times have mentioned, we think we had the ghost go past us. There was a cold feel in a part of the pub, but was not near any doors. So, yeah. Next, autonomous doors.
Yes.
As in those that open and close themselves. Anyway, since ghosts can get through doors without bothering to open them, it's thought that this symptom is in the live-in origin category.
Yes.
Yeah, not a ghost.
It's not a ghost. It's a person doing it, and it may even be a person doing it using their own powers. And again, of course, we have doors that hear that.
Definitely.
If you don't shut them quite properly, they open. And they...
Actually, it was only some nights ago that the door to
Yes.
the bedroom kept opening and closing. It might have been the 60-mile-an-hour winds that are outside, and we live in a barn. But
Yes,
anyway.
yeah. And then another one, anomalous electronics. This is appliances that do weird things. And again, you get into the question of, is it something supernatural that is causing the interference, or is it just electronics? And I say, with the benefit of more years than we care to like to think about, talking about and writing about technology, I think it's more likely the technology.
Yes, indeed. A bit like that enormously irritating predictive texting, which you could possibly put down to some sort of...
Yes, there's someone trying to communicate with me.
Yes,
Yeah.
because just a rant here. You type something and you read it and it's fine. Go on a few lines. Behind your back, it changes it.
I know.
Have you noticed that?
Oh, yeah.
There's some plot. I don't know. Right.
Yep.
Now then.
Invisible presences.
Presences, yes. This is an interesting one. And it's a bit difficult to evaluate it, obviously. But...
It's only dogs and cats who can see them.
Yes, it does. It does get some support from... There are many accounts of dogs and cats reacting as they would if there was a threatening intruder. And of course we know their senses are 10 million, 1,000, zillion times better than ours. So, yeah, they'd be quite a good Ghostbuster, wouldn't they, really?
They would.
But
they
don't
would.
seem to use them.
No.
Do they?
No.
Anyway.
Yes, there is nothing more spooky than when you're sitting there and you can see the dog or a cat is staring at something quite intently, but it's not you.
Yes. Yeah.
Things off shelves, which really falls into categories we've had before, along with psychokinesis. Things that drop off shelves, well, again, was it a ghost? With, again, that situation you hear people talk about where they talk about a particular subject and then something happens, a picture falls off the wall or an ornament drops off.
Yep.
And again, were you invoking some form of supernatural response? And then the final one.
Phantom nudgers. Well, I can't say I've ever experienced a phantom nudger. They actually are surprisingly common and give their victims the impression that there's a mischievous spirit around.
Yes.
But then again, a nudge is a sort of instance of psychokinesis. And these can originate from our minds, or it could just be, one of those things where your nerves suddenly all twang, or your neurotransmitters all kind of go in a jumble. And yeah, I've had that happen, but I've never ascribed it to a ghost, I have to say.
What's interesting in the book here, where it's talking about pubs, is that, as he says, barmaids who are quite used to human nudges reckon they can tell the difference when it's a person who's giving them a pinch on the bum.
Yeah.
In old-fashioned, non-political, politically incorrect days. Nobody does that now at all. Goodness me, no.
A slap upside head, wouldn't they, nowadays?
Yes, and some other untoward experience. Anyway, there we are. And I say you can get the Haunted Pub Guide from Guy Lyon Playfair. You can find it on Amazon on various second-hand bookshops and sales there.
Fun stuff.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Janie.
You're welcome.
Ahoy, me hearties. No landlubbers round here. No, it's not International Talk Like a Pirate Day. The next one of those isn't until the 19th of September 2020. But I thought I'd have a look at some common maritime myths and superstitions. My starting point is the belief in the Dies Infaustus, which is badly pronounced Latin for unlucky day. In other words, days in olden times when seamen said it was ill-omened and therefore not a good day to start a voyage. In other words, leave us alone, Captain, we'll have another day in the pub. Fridays were considered to be the unluckiest day of the week, as that was when Jesus Christ was crucified on a Friday. That's a belief that goes back to the Middle Ages. Thursdays were also considered to be unlucky because it was named after Thor, the pagan god of storms and thunder, and clearly not something you want to encounter in the days of wooden sailing ships. You'll notice the mariners have been rather crafty there, taking advantage of Christian beliefs for a Friday no sail and pagan beliefs for a Thursday no sail. There's a similar and equally understandable superstition in 18th century New England that rolling clouds and roaring waves were a bad omen. What about Sundays? Well, they were to be avoided because any God-fearing sailor would be attending church and saying their prayers. That said, on a personal note, growing up in a seaport town, I did observe fishermen had no objection to setting sail on the first available high tide on a Sunday evening. Presumably they were done praying by then. Another bad day was the first Monday in April, since this was supposedly the day the biblical Cain slew Abel. You could also forget the second Monday in August, as that was when the equally legendary cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. Finally, there was a reluctance to set sail on Candlemas Day, that's the 2nd of February, the belief being that any voyage begun on that day would end in disaster. This is a bit of an odd one, but seems to be linked to the old superstition that all Christmas decorations had to be removed by Candlemas. This was a practice that continued well into Victorian times, as in the mid-19th century, whereas obviously today is the belief is it should be taken down by 12th night, which, depending on how you calculate, is either the 5th or the 6th of January. And any discussion of unlucky dates to sail wouldn't be complete without a reference to the urban myth surrounding the English warship HMS Friday. As with all urban myths, the details of the story vary, but it goes something like this. At some point during the 19th century, the Royal Navy attempted to dispel the old superstition among sailors that beginning a voyage on a Friday was a bad idea. To demonstrate the falseness of this belief, they commissioned a ship called HMS Friday. Her keel was laid down on a Friday. She was launched on a Friday. Her commander was a Captain James Friday, and her maiden voyage began on Friday the 13th, and she was never heard of again. Pretty scary, except it's got a slight problem in that there's never been a Royal Navy ship called HMS Friday, and although you will often see reference to this in those sort of truth is stranger than fiction type items that crop up as fillers in newspapers and sometimes on television, the story's origins appear to date back to the mid-20th century, in fact, to the 4th of February 1971, when the Irish comedian Dave Allen told that story on BBC television on his then programme, Dave Allen at Large. So you say, what would happen if you did set sail on an unlucky day? Well, there's a good chance you'd end up going down to Davy Jones Locker, which is generally the phrase for the bottom of the sea where all drowned sailors and shipwrecks go. But what do we know about Davy Jones and his locker? The first reference I've been able to track down for it is in a story called The 4 Years' Voyages of Captain George Roberts. It was written by Daniel Defoe and published in 1726. And he makes a reference that the captain says he would toss them all into Davy Jones' lockers if they did try to rebel against him. But where did the name come from? One suggestion is it's really derived from the ghost of Jonah. Another was that there was a real David Jones, not the one in the Monkeys, but a real pirate, but not that well known, who operated in the Indian Ocean in the 1630s. That there was a sailor called Duffer Jones, who was notoriously myopic and frequently fell overboard, which sounds even more implausible, and that there was a British pub owner called Davy Jones who threw drunken sailors into his beer cellars and then gave them up to press gangs going by to be put onto a ship. Yeah, bit implausible as well. As you probably know, it's mainly wicked sailors who go down to Davy Jones Lockers, pirates and the life of that. However, if you were a pious sailor, then you would go to an altogether more pleasant place called Fiddler's Green, where there is, and I'm quoting here from a 19th century source, perpetual mirth, a fiddle that never stops playing, and dancers who never tire. And it also appears in Frederick Marryat's novel The Dog Fiend, which was published in 1856, and is the lyrics of a sailor's song. At Fiddler's Green, where seamen true, where here they've done their duty, the bowl of grog shall still renew and pledge to love and beauty. So, don't go to sea on Thursdays, Fridays or Sundays. If you do, you risk going to Davy Jones, but if you've been a good boy, then you go to Fiddler's Green. We don't make a point of blowing our own trumpet on this show, but when we do, let's get out the full horns section. A couple of reviews in. These have both come in on the Apple Podcasts reader reviews, where we're currently rating 4.8 out of 5 stars in terms of reader reviews. Here's one. When I say this show is unlike any other, that is in the most amazing way possible. The topics are so varied and well crafted. No two are similar in content, but they are all really informative, strange and interesting. I think I've learned something new in each episode, and that is remarkable. Really glad I stumbled upon Weird Tales, the name delivers, and then some. And then this other one here. Wonderful. I adore this show. It's charming and the hosts are both knowledgeable and pleasantly humorous. I enjoy the combination of folklore and history and practical magic. Well, another great one. However, there is some bad news, and I'm going to read this one. This was a bit of negative feedback. My only negative feedback is that they, that's us, play this tinkling sort of seance parlour bell track throughout certain segments, and the tone of the bells feels like a high-pitched nagging alarm. It sets my teeth on edge. I have to skip ahead until it's over. If they could just get rid of that bell track, this would be a perfect podcast. Well, these are the tinklies that he's complaining about, and there they are. And never let it be said we don't listen to our listeners. So that's it. That's the last time you'll ever hear the tinklies. And we just have to find another soundtrack that's for the practical magic sections. Anyway, thank you for your views. Keep them coming in. We love the positive reviews, but if you've got a constructive criticism, we'd like to hear that from you as well.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
So, story going around on the west of England about the village of Prestbury. It's in Gloucestershire, and a spat has arisen between a Mike James, who runs Cotswold Ghost Tours, and the vicar, the Reverend Nick Bromfield. And the basic problem is the leading ghost on the ghost walk around Prestbury is the Black Abbot, who apparently manifests in the churchyard, walks across the churchyard before disappearing through a wall leading to the high street, and was apparently photographed in 1990. Now, the issue is the guide goes through the churchyard, St Mary's Church, and the vicar is saying it's causing a disturbance. And he says it's not good for families, and especially not for children, this is the lead up to Halloween, to be used and exposed to stories about ghosts. And he's saddened to see our church used as a backdrop to promote ghost tours to children. And generally he's again it. And the Mike James has said, it's one of the most haunted villages in the country, and people want to know about it. But they say, the vicar's of the view, it's disrupting people visiting graves, which obviously the tour operator says isn't really that relevant, because most of his tours take place at night when people aren't visiting graves. And he's now, that's Mr. James, who runs the tours, is going to pull out and go and do something else. And the parish councillor of Prestbury, John Payne, said, I've no objection to ghost tours, providing they don't offend local organisations, but goes on to add that he knows the vicar is and I quote, stunningly religious man. So, just how haunted is the village of Prestbury? Well, we have the Black Abbot, who walks through the churchyard. We have the Strangler, who lurks at Cleves Corner, and this figure supposedly tries to choke anybody seen loitering around there or people he takes a dislike to. There's a little old lady who wanders around the high street, and strange figures drifting around the rolls, and some debate whether it's a couple of ghosts or the same one. There's also the Plough Public House, and according to a medium who's been there were 3 spirits in that pub. No obvious jokes. A man named Jack and 2 women. And the landlady has reported she's encountered poltergeist experience. Outside the Prestbury House Hotel, you can hear phantom hooves. It's also said there's a ghost of a young girl who moves around the garden. Then, in the road leading through the village, a royalist courier, that's from the Civil War, galloping through the village. Unfortunately, there was a rope strung across the road, and the courier ran into it and was thrown from his horse and killed, and he's still there, unhappy. And going back even further, there's a manifestation of a Lancastrian. This is in the Wars of the Roses, and he was a messenger, doomed to carry his cargo forevermore, and apparently he was decapitated. Actually, it does sound like the charging horseman and the royalist courier might be the same ghost, as they both seem to have galloped through the village and then been knocked off their horses. So that's Pressbury. However, Janie is here and she's been delving into the paranormal database, and she is of the opinion that Pluckley in Kent is England's most haunted village.
Yes, there's a little business opportunity here for somebody to do. Yeah, possibly. Anyway, yes, so there's, I don't know, 10, 15? Well, I can't remember what your total was. Let's just see if this beats it, shall we?
Well, I got in Pressbury, and I say there's a little bit of duplication on some of the ghosts, but there's 3, 5, 7.
I say. Pish.
Pish.
Right. Pluckley. Is it the most haunted village, we ask? Well, this is what they have to contend with. Around the area of the brickworks, Pluckley Heath, screaming. Heard last in 1991. Yes, it's a sort of bit uncommon, but they have it a lot, apparently. It's quite blood-curdling. Yeah, well, it would be, wouldn't it?
I believe it's a person a brickmaker who was killed when a load of earth fell on top of him or something.
Oh, you have more information. Anyway, it's not a fox, apparently.
No.
People have said it's a fox. And others say, I heard it, and it isn't, and I know what fox noises sound like, so... Meh. Right, next, flickering light.
Ooh.
Yeah. This is near the church, or around the church of St Nicholas, in Pluckley again. Apparently, sounds of knocking can be heard coming from beneath the church at night, often accompanied by a flickering and fluttering light inside the empty building. Ooh. Some say the light belongs to Lady Dering, who was buried in 3 lead coffins in an attempt to prevent her decay. The churchyard is reputed to be haunted by a red lady. I imagine that's in a red dress. Wandering the area in search of her missing baby. Finally, inside the church is also said to be haunted by a woman in mid-20th century clothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, number 3, Victorian woman. Well, where would we be without the manifestation of a Victorian woman? And this is around the Daring Arms public house. Supposedly a phantom woman in Victorian clothing who lurks by the bar. Right. Number 4, Pleased to Meet You is the heading, because you'll see why. It's the Devil's Bush.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's one of those there bushes which nobody quite knows where it is, luckily, that can be used to summon the devil by dancing 3 or 13 times round it and saying, or not saying, a spell, which we don't know about.
Yes.
Glad to say. Number 5, Headmaster. And this is at Dicky Buss's Lane, specifically. Last heard 1965. Here's a phantom headmaster who's observed by an author in the mid-20th century. The entity wore stripy trousers and an old coat.
He's a school teacher who
Yes, he is.
hanged himself or something?
Yes, something like that.
Yeah.
Number 6, a walker. This is near Elvey Farm Hotel. And been blamed for poltergeist activity and is said to frequent the farmhouse. There's also reports of a haunting smell, that of burning yarn or wool. I have no more information on that.
Okay.
It's a tantalising piece of information. Number 7, Dying Highwayman. This was Firth, but maybe Fright Corner. And it's a large spectral tree has been seen there, together with a highwayman pinned to it by several swords. And then on other occasions, an elderly phantom woman is spotted, thought to be a gypsy woman. And apparently she accidentally set herself on fire with her pipe while sleeping.
Don't smoke in bed.
No, well, or under a bush by the sound of it. Anyway, Miller. Number 8 is Miller, and this was at Mill Hill, where a ruined mill once stood near the Pinnock. And it's located, the location is haunted by both a miller and a gypsy woman. Oh, now, this would seem to be similar to the other one because she's meant to have burnt to death on the site.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll skip that one and wonder if
Yes.
that's quite
Yes.
true. They're just trying to bump up the numbers here a bit. Anyway, Colonel, as in army.
Military. Yes.
Yeah. Park Wood, which no longer stands. Time date, pre-1965. The woodland, which was levelled in 1965, was home to a phantom officer who hanged himself on the site.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, another favourite, Tudor Lady. This is somewhere in the region of Rose Court in Pluckley. This is a reputed female phantom who could be heard calling out for her hounds, but she hasn't been heard for many years. She apparently committed suicide by eating poisonous berries. Yeah. Number 11, or 10 if you're being picky and
Yes.
counting. Okay. This is Screams again, at a place called Screaming Woods. So you're pretty much ticked off.
I got a clue, yeah.
If you go there, what you're going to get. Anyway, a local legend says the screams emerged from the woodland and they belonged to those who became lost and died among the trees. Well, it's going to be pretty large wood. If you,
Yes, yes.
All right then, we'll let that go. Dog walkers. This is Pluck again, as we say. Station Road area around Greystone's house. And a monk was reported seen in 1971. Anyway, it's also a couple involved, and it seems to be an all too common love triangle that ends in suicide. The couple and their little dog can be heard walking and chatting, quite cheerful then, down this area of the road. And it's also the home to a phantom monk.
Mm-hmm.
Number 13 is Invisible Hand.
Ooh.
And this can be seen at the Black Horse Public House, apparently, from the 1980s onwards. It's a non-alcoholic spirit, little joke, and it moves items across the bar, tidies, and sometimes hides coats and wallets. So people can't pay their bar bill.
Yes. Oh dear, I can't pay. The ghost has stolen my wallet.
The site is also home to disembodied screaming.
Oh, right. They seem
That's
to
when
like...
they find they can't find their wallet.
Yes.
Their wallet, yes.
They seem to have a bit of thing about the screaming in this village.
Number 14, Horses and Carriage at good old Mainstay.
Mm-hmm.
Seen trotting down the main street. The carriage pulled by 2 horses or 4, and the source of this is unknown. And then finally, number 15, unnamed road in the village, unknown ghost type, last seen late 20th century. A taxi driver reported seeing a man on the roadside who flagged a taxi down. The fare climbed in the back of the cab, but when the driver turned round to ask his passenger where he was heading, he found the car empty.
Ooh.
So, there we have it.
Yeah. Well, they've certainly got a lot of ghosts.
They would seem to.
Yes, and...
Not going there.
No. And it's also interesting that it's not something that's been dreamt up relatively recently. In Usborne's World of the Unknown Ghosts, which is a classic book on ghosts in the UK from 1977, but 42 years later it's just been reissued. That also features Pluckley as the most haunted village.
Verification is
Complete with a map, so you can wander around and see where they are. And on a final note, going back to our vicar in Gloucestershire, when he was talking about why he didn't like the ghost hunting, he says, there are parts in the Bible that say, leave this stuff alone. This is a Christian church. Frankly, we don't want people's stories about ghosts, spectres and poltergeists. to which we should point out that the word ghost appears in the Bible 108 times, including to give up the ghost and, of course, the Holy Ghost. There's also the somewhat confusing element in Deuteronomy in the Old Testament. References 18:9, which says, "Let no one be found among you who consigns his son or daughter to fire, who is an ogre or soothsayer, a diviner, a sorcerer, one who casts spells, or who consults with ghosts and familiars." And the interesting point is that it seems to assume, the Bible assumes, that magic, ghosts and spirits are real. And this is followed up again in chapter 28 of the first book of Samuel, which features the story of King Saul and the Witch of Endor, who he commissions to summon up a ghost of the prophet Samuel. And once again, it seems to say that, yes, it is possible to summon up ghosts and talk to them.
Be that as it may, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, I agree with the vicar. It's his church, it's his bat, his ball. He can say what he wants done in his churchyard. And frankly, yeah, I'm not sure that I'd be that pleased to have a great troop of people following behind somebody. Just my personal opinion for anybody that wants it.
No, good point.
I'm
Well
with
made.
him. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
England, home to zombies, werewolves, green-skinned fairy folk? And how about dragons, strange monoliths and vampires? If you're fascinated by the bizarre and unexplained, join Charles on a road trip around the newly discovered walled Newton Triangle, where fact is much weirder than any fiction. Check out Charles Christian's fantastic Kindle book, A Travel Guide to Yorkshire's Weird Wolds, on amazon.co.uk and amazon.com.
Very shortly it'll be Halloween and or Mischief Night it used to be called when I was growing up in the north of England, and trick-or-treating. Now one of the peculiarities of that is a belief that you couldn't be arrested for doing mischief over Halloween. And this actually dates back to this concept in folklore of lawless hours and lawless days. So let's wind it back. And it first starts to crop up during the 18th century. And it's a belief that in specific locations of the country, the normal laws of the land were suspended, so behaviour which would otherwise be illegal was temporarily tolerated. One of the most common occurrences was the civic procedure of mayor-making. This is the days when mayors and town councils held very real powers in England. And there was a belief that in the gap between the old mayor departing and the new mayor donning the chains of office, there was a short legal hiatus. This was the so-called lawless hour. For example, in the town of Kidderminster, which is in the West Midlands in England, it was reported in 1790 that on the election of new bailiffs and constables, precursors of model police forces, the town bell would be rung announcing the start of the lawless hour, whereupon local residents would assemble in the main streets and throw cabbage stalks at each other. Then, when the newly elected bailiffs and member of the town council, resplendent in their robes of office, marched through the streets, the most respectable families in the neighbourhood were invited to fling apples at them. Yes, I'm glad it was only the respectable families that were doing it. Wouldn't want the hoi polloi doing it anyway. And it wasn't just mayors and bailiffs. There's also reports that on certain saints' days, including St. Kenelm's Day, which is July the 28th, St. Giles' Day, which is September the 1st, and St. Luke's Day, which is October the 18th, which is pretty much now. Village parsons would be permitted to be pelted with crab apples on their way to the church. This tradition of crabbing the parson was brought to an end in the mid-19th century after reports that sticks and stones were also being thrown instead of apples. Other manifestations of the lawless hours, including a belief that some days of the year, including Good Friday, St Andrew's Day, which is the 3rd of November, and Boxing Day, it was permissible to go into local woods and hunt for small animals and birds, particularly squirrels. Obviously, squirrels are a small animal, not a bird. Whereas any other time of the year, that would have been the crime of poaching. So it's hardly surprising that Mischief Night and now Halloween were also nights when it was believed that the police, they can't stop you because it's Mischief Night. Yes, well, they can. We do like a bit of geek from time to time, so here's some factoids or unreliable statistics. Apparently 1978 was the year the first spam email was sent by a Gary Thurk, who sent several hundred users on the ARPANET network a message to drum up interest in a presentation he was giving on a DEC System 20 computer. Hands up anybody who can remember what DEC computers are. And another one, 20 hours. That's the average time a koala bear spends asleep each day. Actually, we've got a chihuahua, which I think can beat that. And finally, 21 seconds. That's the additional amount of time it takes a seagull to approach you for food if you make and hold eye contact with them. This tends to suggest that staring at seagulls doesn't make them fly away, it just slows down their approach when they try and pinch your chips. So you're warned. And that's it. We're all out of time. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll hope you'll join us again same time next week. Till then, it's Charles Christian saying good night for now, and until the next time, stay well, stay different.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com, and on Twitter @ChristianUncut. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Good night.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.